bullshit.
The No BS Marketing Show is brought to you by Laramore's men's and women's designer clothing. Free shipping, free returns. Shop men's and women's designer clothing, shoes, accessories, jewelry, and more online at laramores.com or in-store downtown Pittsburgh. Our guest today is Sean Ellis, CEO and founder of growthhackers.com, the #1 online community built for growth hackers. He coined the term growth hacking in 2010 after using it to ignite growth for Dropbox, Eventbrite, LogMeIn, and Lookout, each now worth billions of dollars. Sean also founded and sold customer insights company Qualaroo, growing it to millions of dollars in recurring revenue with customers such as Uber, Starbucks, and Amazon. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be on.
Let's start by having you walk us through your educational background and your career journey.
Sure. Yes, I studied at UC Davis. I studied international relations, but with a lot of economics courses. I really enjoyed economics. I think it relates a lot to marketing. And then when I graduated, I actually moved over to Eastern Europe because that was it was early 90s and the wall had just come down, and it was that was a really interesting part of the world at that point. And and so first thing I did was I got into cold call selling and did that for a couple of years, and very much kind of a sink or swim, eat or don't figure out how to sell what I was doing. So I was selling advertising into business journals, and then had an opportunity to invest in a friend's company that was going to be doing something with the internet, and that was 1995. So I think because I was selling advertising, I liked the promise of the internet, of being able to really target messages to individuals and tailor messages. And so I didn't understand a whole lot about it, but kind of took all of my commissions that were owed to me, borrowed some money against those commissions, put it all into an internet company in 1995, which, in the big picture of things, seemed to be like a really smart bet to make, but you didn't know that in 1995. So, and then I ended up joining that company about 6 months later to, it was a game company called uproar.com. And so they needed people to sell advertising. So that's why I originally went there, to sell advertising, but moved to New York with the company. And when I tried to approach some of the agencies to sell advertising to them, they said, we don't care about reaching 122 people, which was probably about how many people we had on the service. So I was able to talk with the CEO and say, gosh, we really got to focus more on trying to grow this user base if we're ever going to be able to sell advertising, and got a temporary opportunity to try to grow the user base, and turned out I was pretty good at it. And kind of fast forward, because there's a lot that I could put in between, but we became a top 10 website in the world. It was number 8 in terms of total usage time on kind of the ComScore earlier product called Mediametrics. And then from that, once we sold that business, I helped start with the founder of Uproar, LogMeIn. I was back in Budapest for that, and basically ran marketing at LogMeIn from customer zero through our NASDAQ filing for LogMeIn. And then after that, I decided I wanted to move out to the West Coast, and started to really look back at those two opportunities and said, gosh, what mattered, what didn't matter in those two opportunities, and found that I thought a lot of what we did in the first kind of 6 months of customer interaction, figuring out things like who liked the product, why did they like it, or more importantly, who loved the product, why did they love it, instrumenting the tracking, kind of just getting all of the pieces right that ultimately helped us to grow those businesses, was what most companies were messing up. So I went into a bunch of companies in interim VP marketing roles to basically get them sort of set up right for growth. And so that's when I was at Dropbox and Eventbrite and Lookout and some of the other ones that you mentioned, and learned a lot through that. Then did Qualaroo, as you mentioned, the business that we sold, and then I've been working on Growth Hackers now for a couple of years.
It's an incredible story. Go back to what you did to help your first company become one of the top 10 websites in the world. Talk about 3 to 5 of the things that you remember the most that were marketing type activities that helped that to become that status?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I did was, we were competing against really the richest companies on the internet at that time. So in the game space, it was Microsoft had a game property, Yahoo had a game property. Number one advertiser on the internet was Sony. So they had Sony Station, which was cross-promoted from Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune, their television properties. And so, a lightly funded company going up against that competition really meant we had to figure out, some pretty creative, unique things to drive growth. And so first thing that I did was I worked really closely with the engineering team to make sure that we could track everything. And what people kind of take for granted today as pretty important tracking, we were in the mid 90s putting in something where I could see every dollar that I was spending, how many ad impressions were we creating across our game network. I could not always see exactly what my return on investment was, but I could at least see what my relative return on investment was. So just allocating dollars into whichever ad opportunity generated the most ad impressions per dollar spent. So I think that was pretty cutting edge at that time for the mid 90s. And then the other thing I learned pretty quickly was that I didn't need to spend $10,000, which was the minimum spend for a lot of properties, or even $20,000 to figure out if it was going to work or not. So a lot of having to tap into my sales skills to convince these different properties that let me only spend $500, and if the return on investment is good, I may be able to spend $200,000 with you. But we were really focused on trying to maximize our return on investment, and again, in a backdrop of the .com companies that were spending crazy amounts of money and not really worried about what their return on investment was. We just didn't have the resources to have waste. So that was kind of the front part of it. We probably still wouldn't have been that big doing that, but our biggest breakthrough thing that we did was I started just looking at how do we leverage the network effects of the internet and just kind of rethink how advertising works. So instead of trying to convince people to come to our website to play the games, we came up with an idea to actually bring the games to the people on whatever website they were on. So we created really one of the first, but maybe the first embeddable widget on third-party sites that started the gameplay process on these third-party sites. And then as people played the game, they would qualify for a cash prize, which then they would register to be in the drawing for that cash prize. And then we had a really smooth transition to get them into playing multiplayer games on our site. And so we got those games syndicated out across about 40,000 websites, all spread virally with add this game to your website. And including some big ones like CNN and CBS Sportsline. And so you combine this whole network of sites, and that gave us, we were getting activated customers who were coming in and playing our games for 50 cents each. We actually did pay a bounty out to these different companies, but I mean, at the time, most other free registered products were spending hundreds of dollars for a sign up, and we're spending 50 cents. And so we actually were a public company from 1997 there. We listed on the Vienna Stock Exchange and then another European stock exchange. And finally we went on NASDAQ in 2000. But we had to publish all of our numbers, and we had the lowest customer acquisition cost of any for a free registered user of any publicly traded company by a ton. I think Yahoo at the time was $30 was their acquisition cost for a free registered user. Ours averaged out to less than $5, but a lot of it was because we had these just thousands of 50-cent signups through this syndicated widget that I mentioned.
With Sean Ellis of Growth Hackers, in fact, he's the original growth hacker because he coined the phrase. Going to go back and talk a little bit because you gave a ton of value in these three items that you said you did at that first endeavor and then build upon that. So having been very early in my career in corporate America in the mid to late 90s, I know what you're talking about from the tracking standpoint, because on the corporate side, the CEO, CFO would always want tracking from marketing, branding, advertising, communications, messaging. It was always a struggle. And I remember back then trying to get to be able to track. So let's take item number one for like just a minute or two and maybe tell us a couple of memorable anecdotes of how when you were building that so you could track everything and how working with engineering enabled that to happen. Because a lot of times marketing, sales, advertising people didn't work as much with operations or engineering. And now that's commonplace. Someone that's 25 right now just thinks, what are you talking about? So maybe tell an anecdote about that first item.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the starting point was that as I mentioned, I think that the precursor to that is because I had put all of my money into the company, I cared a lot more about figuring it out than I did about looking good. And so I think, and because I'd come from the pressure of cold call selling right before, where you're only as good as your sales numbers. You can't BS your sales numbers. And so I basically came from this sort of funnel mentality where I was able to kind of track my daily activity as a salesperson, and then rolled that into marketing, where it was really just about, man, if I remember the first thing that I did was the CEO said, yeah, go ahead and try to grow this thing. And what I did is I went to Excite, a Yahoo kind of competitor at the time, and the cheapest deal I could do with them was $20,000. And so we didn't have a ton of money at the time, but I was like, okay, if that's what I got to do, he wants me to grow this thing. I spent it, and we like doubled our users from that one advertising campaign. And my CEO's like, oh my God, this is awesome. It's working. And I looked at it and I said, how the heck are we possibly going to get a return on investment on that $20,000? I looked at it and thought, so now we have 400 people instead of 200 people. You can't tell me that those extra 200 people are worth $20,000. And so I think that was the starting point of just really trying to, I mean, that's the beauty in an early stage company, is that there's not a lot of moving parts. And so I could actually see, even if I didn't have the good tracking, I could see now we have 400 and we had 200 before, and I spent the money. So just kind of through chain correlation, but it was literally a matter of just asking another question and really trying to, and again, I mentioned economics was a big part of my focus in college. And so, competitive advantage is kind of a theme there. You may not be the best overall, but what are you relatively better at? And I knew that relatively we had awesome engineers that were a fraction of the cost of these competitors. So I was just trying to leverage that as much as possible. And so I don't remember exactly how our tracking ended up getting so sophisticated, but it was literally one question at a time. Can we track this? Can we track this? And just constantly trying to get them to figure out how we can essentially, I mean, so, and like UTMs were how we were doing a lot of it, but basically, being able to set up a tracking URL with the campaigns, and then having a database that would carry that in, and being able to then tie which users came from that campaign, and then how many ad impressions did they see across our network. So I think the tracking possibilities were actually probably there for everybody back then, but most marketers didn't ask the question because they were probably afraid of the answer. And so I may have been afraid of the answer if I sort of grew up in marketing and hadn't invested every dollar I had into the business. But, to me, I would rather look like an idiot, but figure out how to do it right. Yeah, at that time, then look awesome and to be wasting money for the business.
That takes a lot of courage, because you had the courage to invest all your money, and then you had the courage to be willing to look, as you said, look like an idiot, because I think that's what a lot of us do. We get into a position and we're worried about what happens if we make a mistake. And I love your background, because you're all about testing and living with the mistake and learning from it and adapting and getting better. So yeah. I wanted to take the second one, because I also like this one, having had to do it with mirrors early in my career. That in the middle of my career, I had millions and millions to spend at large multi-billion-dollar companies on branding and sales and marketing tactics. So you then said the next one was you knew you didn't need to spend or couldn't spend 10,000 or 20,000 to wait to see if something would work. So you had to convince people to let you spend $500 to test things. Talk about that a little bit, because back in that time, late 90s, and you're talking to a salesperson who's used to spending 10, 15, 20,000, having their clients spend 10, 15, $20,000. When you asked them to spend 500, you didn't get like open arms and a hug.
Yeah. So I think it was a lot of kind of conceptual selling back to the salesperson and literally saying, do you want 20,000 from me once, or do you want to work with me to figure out how you can get 200,000 or $1 million from me? If I can show a relative return on investment compared to my other areas where I'm spending money is better with you guys, then I'm going to spend as much as I possibly can. And it's really just a matter of like working with you to creatively figure out how we can deliver that return on investment. And ultimately, that's what built Google and some of these other marketplace clearing price businesses, and even how Facebook works today, where you can spend $100 pretty easily and see if you have that return on investment. But I just think most people didn't believe in the power of their advertising, and there was a lot of people who were really trying to convince you it's not about direct marketing and attract ROI. It's about impressions and how much of your brand are you building. And yeah, to me, that was just so unquantifiable in my return on investment on trying to assign a brand value to it, that I knew that if I could spend cost effectively and get a return on investment where we could then keep respending those dollars, I was going to be way better for brand building in the long term than not being accountable to the spend, but just hoping that I'm getting the best brand return. So I think that was the starting point, was that kind of back and forth. And then the next big sale I had to make was when I brought an agency in to help me with some of this stuff. And the agency, my budget went to the $1 million plus a month eventually, because we when we got the results, then we were able to start to raise more money. And as I mentioned, with the public listings and stuff, we had a decent balance sheet at that point. But so it would have been easy to not hold myself to that same standard. But again, it was like, if I can get the answer if it works or not for $500, why would I spend $20,000 on it? And so essentially convincing the agencies that this is the right way to do this was hard in the beginning. But what was interesting is we ended up working with Avenue A, which became Quantive and eventually got acquired by Microsoft. But we very quickly became their biggest client, and it became a partnership with those guys where they were very data driven, and it became a partnership where I was probably their most hated client and their most loved client at the same time, because I was holding them to a standard that most of their other clients weren't holding them to, but at the same time I was pushing their capabilities envelope way further than any of their other clients. So eventually we became really good partners and friends as they began to kind of think about the things the same way that I thought about it. But then they were literally going out, and the other thing that I wanted to do was have a large part of my monthly $1 million budget spent on testing rather than on just plowing it into the proven campaign. So they were literally, I was doing 20% of my budget. So it was $200,000 divided by 500. Yeah, that's how many campaigns that they had to find and test every single month to help me figure out which ones would then make the ongoing $800,000 budget. And it was just constantly shifting it toward wherever I'd get that best return on investment.
You then mentioned your biggest breakthrough was when you started to rethink how advertising works, and you then brought the game to the people. You took the product to the customer and you embedded it, the widget on sites. Talk about that and how that changed the game.
So again, there's a few things that inspired that. So one of them was, again, trying to think, how do I leverage my really talented developers and much more cost-effective developers than the competitors? And so, how can I actually bring engineering into marketing beyond just the tracking? So that was kind of part of it. But then I saw two things happen in I believe it was 1997 that or around that time, that inspired this. One was Amazon launched its affiliate program, and my perception of their affiliate program was that they were providing storefronts that people could basically embed into their website. It's a little different than that, but that was sort of how I interpreted it. And I thought, gosh, that's really cool that they're essentially able to replicate over and over again stores all around the web rather than just bringing people to their site. So I really like that. And then Hewlett Packard actually ran a banner that that you could play Pong inside the banner. I don't know if you remember that, but it was pretty cool. And you just literally move your cursor up and down, and you're blocking a ball. And I thought, okay, we have games. Our games are mostly sort of trivia and brain type games, but I thought, gosh, if we could combine those two concepts together, where instead of doing it in an advertisement, do it as something that's an embeddable value add piece of content, because stickiness was becoming a big theme for websites, and being able to go to them with the promise of some sticky content that made your site more engaging and then, but also a revenue opportunity. And we're not going to take your ad inventory. We're actually going to expand your ad inventory. So you can put ads around the game. The game itself is where we're going to be able to generate our people from. And so it was kind of each of those. And then I had to bring it to the development team and say, guys, do you think this is something you could do? And, the CEO, obviously, I couldn't just go straight to the development team. I had to, collaborate with the CEO to make sure he was on board with it, then brought it to the development team, and they were able to crank something out that became this thing called Trivia Blitz, which was these embeddable games all across the web.
Hey, no BSers. I love Laramore's men's and women's designer clothing. It's time for you to take your look to the next level. Laramore's is the place to make it happen for you. How do I know? Because they've helped me for years. You talk about combining professionalism and style. That's what happens when you go with Laramore's. You can shop online at laramores.com or in-store in downtown Pittsburgh. Talking to Sean Ellis of Growth Hackers, that was all based on the first question about early in his career, where he took a lot of risks and was really just a courageous guy, like even just the little things like leaving multiple countries to go work at a young age, just impressive stuff. And you talked a lot about being from customer zero through filing of the NASDAQ filing for LogMeIn. Talk a little bit about LogMeIn and then move into the glamorous names of those 3 or 4 right in a row where you were the first marketer for things that are famous and names that as soon as you say them, everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. So take the LogMeIn one and then go into those.
Sure. So LogMeIn, there was a couple of interesting things that we did. So one, we sort of stumbled into LogMeIn based on an earlier product that the company had developed called Remotely Anywhere, which was a remote server administration product. But because the name was somewhat descriptive, being remotely anywhere, people started trying to use it to gain remote access into their own computer. But they were tying up our support team because it was really hard to use because it wasn't intended for consumers. So they were, the support team had to explain to them how to open firewall ports and do all these things where what we said is, gosh, there's a market for this if we can figure out how to make this thing easy to use. And so the dev team put their heads together and basically created what is LogMeIn today. And the problem was, but that by the time that we came out with it, so it took about a year and a half of product development. That was kind of the way things were done back then. And today people are much more iterative and get a product out quick. But so by the time we came out with it, the competitive landscape had changed, and GoToMyPC had actually already released a product that was very easy to use. Not only had they released it, they built it up to the point where they had already sold themselves to Citrix, and so they've been acquired, I believe, for a couple $100 million. And so we're coming in with this product that's just released that looks pretty close to what they have, and there's already an 800-pound gorilla in the space. And so, our initial thought was this is going to be really hard. And they were spending millions and millions of dollars marketing on radio and TV and other places. So it was like, gosh, it's going to be really hard for us to break into this space. So first thing that I did was thought, gosh, how can we compete against these guys and not play the game exactly the way that they're playing it? And so I was looking at one other thing in that space, which was VNC, which was another remote access tool, but it was actually really hard to use, but because it was free, it was also very popular. So you had this ultra premium product that's super easy to use, and then this really hard to use but free product. And I thought, gosh, if we can have a free version of a very easy to use product, then that might be a good way to break into the space. And so again, went back to the engineers. Unfortunately, what we found when I brought the idea to the CEO is that it would be nearly impossible. It was $8 per user per year was just our bandwidth costs on delivering the product. So it's really hard to give something away for free that costs you $8 per user per year, especially later we had hundreds of millions of users on there. So you can start to do the math that would be pretty tough. But our engineers, again, a lot of the same engineers from the previous company, these really talented Hungarian engineers, were able to go and come up with a breakthrough in the technology that allowed them to just do it for pennies per year and still make it really easy to use. And so once they did that breakthrough, then we were able to start marketing a free product now, which helped. There's other challenges with a free to premium product. When I believe that was the first freemium SaaS business that launched, and the challenge with it is that just your whole economics are different. You have to pay to get people on the free, and then however much revenue you generate from 100 people who try free, that's how much you can spend to acquire the next 100 people on the free product. And so it's a little bit more math than if you're just kind of acquiring customer by customer. But the math was really tough. And what I found was that I went out, started spending money, and hit a wall at about $10,000 per month, where after that, I was wasting money. And so, typically I would just be, people would say to the marketer, well, you're just not being creative enough. Just get to work and dig deeper and figure out something else, test faster, whatever. But what I did is I stepped back and I looked at the data and could see that 95% of the people who were signing up for the free product didn't even use it once. And so if they didn't use the product, they weren't going to convert to pay for it. There was no positive word of mouth. There was nothing else that was going to give us a return on investment. So again, brought the data to the CEO and said, man, if we could just get more of these people using the product, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing would probably be working, but we're kind of broken lower funnel. And so I brought that. He agreed that was really important. And to his credit, he then brought the rest of the engineering and product team and said, this is really important. We've got to figure out how to get that first user experience so easy and so good that we get these people actually using the product. And so he said, we're going to put a freeze on the product development roadmap, a complete freeze, and it's all hands on deck to figure out how to get our activation rate up for new users. And so in about 4 months, we diagrammed the entire user journey, ran a ton of tests all the way through, lots of usability studies and surveys, and just really tried to figure out, why are people giving up as they're going in and trying to use this product for the first time. And through all of that testing, we actually got about 1,000% improvement in the sign up to usage rate. And that alone would help the business a lot. But what it actually did was it took these previous campaigns that I had been testing, and the majority of them being not positive return on investment campaigns, and suddenly we could scale that budget from $10,000 a month to about $1 million a month, and had a 3-month payback on marketing dollars invested. And so it just opened everything up. And so I think that was a big aha for me, is that growth is not just what you do on the marketing side, but it is cross-functional. It is every customer touch point all the way through the business, and an improvement in activation, an improvement in retention, an improvement in how you monetize. Any of those things are going to improve your return on investment, which is going to drive your ability to spend more money acquiring customers in the first place. So that was really the hockey stick in the business, and the big aha that led to a lot of the things that I did at Dropbox and Lookout and Eventbrite was based on just trying to get that thought process in these businesses from the beginning, and not have to sort of convince people later on when things are broken, to get everybody thinking holistically about that customer experience.
Hear more of my interview with Sean Ellis on part 2 of the No BS Marketing Show. Thanks for joining us for the No BS Marketing Show, brought to you by Laramore's Men's and Women's Designer Clothing. Free shipping, free returns. Shop men's and women's designer clothing, shoes, accessories, jewelry, and more online at laramores.com or in-store downtown Pittsburgh. Visit masssolutions.biz for show notes, plus additional marketing and messaging resources like our No BS Marketing Weekly Update. Sign up and receive timely, valuable ideas to improve your marketing and transform your message. Again, visit masssolutions.biz. Remember, ask yourself, what's the big idea? And build your story around the answer. It's all about bold solutions, no BS.